Boa noite a todos. É com imenso prazer que hoje eu dou a entrada do nosso laboratório aqui para vocês, do nosso primeiro simpósio pelo Laboratório de Exercício Físico em Doenças Crônicas, o simpósio Ledoc de Exercício Físico em Doenças Crônicas, localizado na Unesp de Bauru. Gostaria de agradecer a presença de todos aqui nesse segundo dia de palestras, lembrando que teremos ainda mais 2 dias. Hoje, então, teremos a palestra com o professor Cristian Alvarez, da Universidade de Los Lagos, no Chile, onde ele vai abordar exercício, diabetes, obesidade e Covid-19. Amanhã teremos palestra com o professor Tiago Peçanha e, na quinta-feira, com o professor Emanuel Gomes Ciolac. Então, agradeço novamente a presença de todos vocês aqui hoje. E para dar início às nossas atividades hoje, iniciaremos com 2 trabalhos publicados pelo nosso grupo, onde a Bianca Fernandes e também o professor Emanuel Gomes Ciolac vão mostrar alguns resultados do que o nosso laboratório vem desenvolvendo e também trazendo dentro da pesquisa em exercício físico e doenças crônicas.
Olá, sou Bianca Fernandes, pesquisadora do Laboratório de Pesquisa em Exercício Físico e Doenças Crônicas da Unesp de Bauru. Faço mestrado pelo Programa de Pós-Graduação em Ciências do Movimento, onde eu estudo a viabilidade, as adaptações fisiológicas e os benefícios associados à saúde de programa de exercício físico prescrito por aplicativo de celular em indivíduos com diabetes do tipo 2. Hoje eu apresento para vocês um estudo realizado por pesquisadores do nosso laboratório, publicado no ano de 2020, e que discute a necessidade urgente de recomendar atividade física para a gestão do diabetes durante e após o surto de Covid-19. O presente manuscrito aborda as consequências da inatividade física e comportamento sedentário durante a pandemia de Covid-19 em indivíduos com ou em risco de diabetes, e a necessidade urgente de recomendar atividade física e exercícios durante e após o surto atual. Bom, com a pandemia de Covid-19, nós sabemos que muitas pessoas estão adoecendo e sendo levadas à morte. Essa situação se agrava ainda mais quando falamos em doenças crônicas não transmissíveis, em especial o diabetes, que é o foco do nosso presente estudo. Vemos ali o elevado risco de casos graves, internações e mortes por parte destes diabéticos quando estão com o coronavírus. Essa situação atual faz com que mais pessoas procurem o sistema de saúde, havendo, portanto, o colapso neste sistema. Devido a isso, medidas urgentes foram tomadas para conter a propagação do vírus, como, por exemplo, a quarentena e o isolamento social. Essas medidas fizeram com que as pessoas aumentassem os seus hábitos sedentários devido aos trabalhos no home office, porque ficam mais tempo sentados na frente do computador, mexendo no celular, assistindo uma televisão, principalmente por não poderem sair de casa. Houve também o aumento da ingestão de alimentos não saudáveis e o aumento da inatividade física, pois as pessoas elas não estão se movimentando como deveriam e também não estão praticando exercício físico. A primeira figura do nosso estudo apresenta que o diabetes é a segunda doença crônica não transmissível mais prevalente em pacientes com Covid-19. Além disso, esses pacientes com diabetes e Covid-19 têm ali o aumento no número de intervenções médicas, aumento no risco da gravidade da doença e aumento na mortalidade. E toda essa situação se agrava ainda mais quando o diabetes está associado a outras comorbidades, como, por exemplo, a hipertensão arterial e a obesidade. E por que isso acontece? Porque o coronavírus ele penetra nas células humanas por meio da enzima conversora de angiotensina 2, sendo mais atenuado ali no tecido adiposo. Então, tem um grande risco para indivíduos que são obesos. Além disso, deve-se tomar um certo cuidado com o diabetes mal controlado, ou seja, com o diabetes que não está com o seu controle glicêmico em níveis adequados. Então, aqui vemos o exemplo da figura acima de 180. Isto pode, consequentemente, aumentar os marcadores de mau prognóstico aumentar também a gravidade da doença e aumentar o risco de mortalidade. Em contrapartida, os valores mais ideais têm ali um prognóstico melhorado, reduzindo a gravidade da doença e os casos de mortalidade. Nos primeiros meses de quarentena da pandemia de Covid-19, notou-se a redução de 35% no nível de atividade física da população mundial e também um aumento de 28,6% no comportamento sedentário. Estimou-se ainda que a inatividade física pode ter sido responsável por 33 milhões de casos de diabetes do tipo 2 em 2019 e 5,3 milhões de mortes em 2018. Além disso, o aumento da inatividade física também poderá ser responsável por 9,6% dos casos de diabetes e 12,5% de mortalidade geral do mundo anualmente. Na figura 2 do presente estudo, estima-se que a redução no nível de atividade física observada nos primeiros meses de quarentena pode gerar um aumento anual de mais 11,1 milhões de novos casos de diabetes do tipo 2 e resultar ainda em mais 1,7 milhões de mortes no mundo. Para a prevenção e tratamento do diabetes, intervenções no estilo de vida são recomendadas com base em programa de atividade física estruturado. As diretrizes do diabetes recomendam 150 minutos de exercício de intensidade moderada, 30 minutos por dia, 5 dias na semana, ou 75 minutos de exercício de alta intensidade, 25 minutos por dia, 3 dias na semana, associados a 2 a 3 sessões semanais de exercício resistido, com treinamentos de flexibilidade e equilíbrio, se possível, porque também são recomendados, de 2 a 3 dias na semana, principalmente para idosos. Esses hábitos ativos e saudáveis devem estar associados ao comportamento nutricional saudável e também a uma redução do comportamento sedentário. Com o aumento da inatividade física e apesar da ausência de interação social, o estudo demonstra que programas de exercício realizados em casa são úteis, seguros e eficazes para o controle do diabetes, especialmente durante o surto do Covid-19. Neste momento atual de pandemia, devemos focar em estratégias domiciliares que são de fácil acesso, como, por exemplo, a prescrição de treinamento com o próprio peso do corpo e também treinamentos que utilizem equipamentos que são de fácil acesso na nossa casa. Aqui na figura temos o exemplo de uma vassoura. Além disso, podemos utilizar estratégias para prescrição e monitoramento do exercício físico à distância, que é o caso da percepção subjetiva de esforço, que é de fácil acesso, fácil entendimento, é seguro e eficaz e não possui custos adicionais para quem pratica. Por fim, a figura 3 deste estudo demonstra os efeitos negativos da inatividade física e os efeitos positivos da atividade física e do exercício durante o confinamento domiciliar sobre a gestão da saúde da doença em relação às variáveis cardiometabólicas e funcionais, ou seja, parâmetros como sensibilidade à insulina, composição corporal, pressão arterial, frequência cardíaca, função endotelial, aptidão cardiorrespiratória, capacidade funcional, qualidade de vida e entre outros. E todo esse processo está totalmente relacionado com o aumento ou a redução dos níveis de morbidade e mortalidade. Conclui-se, portanto, que a inatividade física pode ter implicações importantes para a saúde pública, incluindo o aumento na carga global de diabetes e outras doenças crônicas não transmissíveis, bem como gerenciamento prejudicado de Covid-19. Além disso, há uma necessidade urgente de recomendar atividade física e/ou exercícios durante e após o surto de Covid-19, para melhorar o controle do diabetes, bem como para prevenir o aumento da carga global de Covid-19, diabetes e outras doenças crônicas não transmissíveis. Encerro a minha apresentação com os agradecimentos às agências de financiamento que serviram de suporte aos pesquisadores do presente estudo, FAPESP, CNPq e CAPES. Obrigada pela atenção e desejo um ótimo evento a todos.
Olá, pessoal. Retornando, professor Emanuel Gomes Ciolac, coordenador do Ledoc, e agora para falar para vocês do trabalho do nosso grupo intitulado Prescrevendo Exercício Intervalado de Alta Intensidade através da percepção subjetiva do esforço em indivíduos com diabetes do tipo 2, respostas metabólicas e hemodinâmicas. Como é sabido, o exercício físico ele está entre a primeira linha de tratamento não farmacológico para os indivíduos que possuem diabetes do tipo 2. Entretanto, muitos dos indivíduos não realizam a quantidade mínima recomendada, ou seja, eles não têm uma adesão àquilo que é recomendado em termos de volume, frequência, intensidade de exercício para essa população. Um dos motivos que é relatado, entre outros, é a ausência de tempo. Em contrapartida, o exercício físico intervalado de alta intensidade, ele tem sido, alguns estudos têm demonstrado que ele é uma ferramenta tempo efetiva, ou seja, com menores sessões de exercício de menor duração, 2, 3 vezes por semana, tem se encontrado benefício no caso dos indivíduos diabéticos, além de melhora da capacidade cardiorrespiratória, mas principalmente benefícios metabólicos, melhor controle da glicemia, melhor resposta da sensibilidade à insulina, tanto de maneira aguda como de maneira crônica, né? Comparado a maiores volumes de exercício de moderada intensidade. Porém, sua orientação, sua prescrição e seu controle têm sido muitas vezes baseados em cima de testes máximos, seja teste ergométrico, seja teste ergospirométrico, onde de acordo com as variáveis, principalmente cardiovasculares encontradas nesses testes, é prescrita a intensidade do exercício a ser realizado. Para o nosso mundo real, muita gente não tem acesso a essa ferramenta, ao teste ergométrico, ao teste ergospirométrico, principalmente aqueles indivíduos de menor poder aquisitivo que não têm um convênio médico, que não têm acesso a uma clínica, a um médico particular. Com isso, nós resolvemos investigar a efetividade da percepção subjetiva do esforço, né? Uma ferramenta que todo mundo conhece aí, extremamente útil, principalmente para orientar o exercício de moderada intensidade. Já no exercício de alta intensidade, especificamente na população diabética, até esse estudo não se sabia se ele era efetivo ou não. Então, nós testamos duas hipóteses na população diabética. Primeiro, de que a percepção subjetiva de esforço é uma ferramenta tão efetiva quanto a resposta da frequência cardíaca ao teste ergométrico para prescrever e automonitorar o exercício intervalado. E a segunda hipótese de que a resposta metabólica e hemodinâmica ao exercício de alta intensidade, independentemente se realizado pela PSE ou pela resposta da frequência cardíaca ao teste ergométrico, seria melhor comparado com o exercício de moderada intensidade. Para isso, né, nós estudamos 11 indivíduos, aqui as características da população que nós estudamos, que realizaram 4 intervenções diferentes. O exercício intervalado, prescrito e automonitorado pela PSE, o exercício intervalado, prescrito e monitorado pela resposta da FC ao teste ergométrico, o exercício de moderada intensidade e a sessão controle. Todo mundo realizou as 4 sessões em dias distintos em ordem aleatória, com no mínimo 3 dias de intervalo entre as sessões e no máximo 10 dias de intervalo. As sessões de exercício intervalado tinham duração de 25 minutos, sendo 4 minutos de aquecimento e 1 minuto em alta intensidade, recuperando com 2 minutos em baixa moderada intensidade até completar os 25 minutos totais. O exercício de moderada intensidade tinha duração de 30 minutos, 4 de aquecimento, mais 26 minutos em moderada intensidade, enquanto que a sessão controle, 30 minutos sentado em repouso. Na PSE, a gente controlava no aquecimento entre 9 a 11, entre fácil e relativamente fácil, alternando de 15 a 17, cansativo a muito cansativo na alta intensidade e recuperando de fácil a relativamente fácil também dos 2 minutos da recuperação. Na resposta da frequência cardíaca, no exercício intervalado, 4 minutos a 50% da frequência cardíaca de reserva no aquecimento, indo a 1 minuto a 85% da frequência cardíaca de reserva e recuperando também com 2 minutos a 50% da frequência cardíaca de reserva. Enquanto que no exercício moderado, o tempo todo entre 11 a 13, relativamente fácil, a ligeiramente cansativo na PSE, que durante a sessão foi o equivalente a aproximadamente 60% da frequência cardíaca de reserva. Medimos antes, imediatamente após, em 45 minutos após a sessão, a pressão arterial, a frequência cardíaca, a glicemia capilar, a variabilidade da frequência cardíaca e a rigidez arterial e reatividade endotelial. Após os 45 minutos de recuperação, tomavam um banho rápido e colocavam a mapa, iam para casa e tinham a pressão arterial monitorada por 24 horas e retornavam no dia seguinte para retirada do aparelho. Durante as sessões de todas as intervenções, a frequência cardíaca também era monitorada. E o que nós encontramos? Então, aqui, no gráfico A, a gente viu que a resposta da frequência cardíaca para as 2 sessões de exercício intervalado, seja controlado pela frequência cardíaca, a bolinha branca aqui, seja controlado pela percepção subjetiva de esforço, a bolinha preta, foi bem semelhante, sem diferença significativa entre as 2 sessões. Quanto que também do exercício de moderada intensidade, ela ficou um comportamento médio entre a alta e a baixa intensidade do exercício intervalado. Na sessão controle, como era de se esperar, a frequência cardíaca muito mais baixa. O mesmo comportamento teve a velocidade da esteira, né? Então, no exercício de alta intensidade, seja controlado pela PSE, seja controlado pela frequência cardíaca, comportamento sem diferença estatística, aumentando na alta intensidade, diminuindo a recuperação, com a velocidade média durante o exercício de moderada intensidade. E aqui no gráfico C é apresentado a frequência cardíaca média nas sessões, né? Aqui em cinza, então sem diferença nas 3 sessões de exercício, na frequência cardíaca média, só havendo diferença entre a alta e a baixa intensidade em relação ao exercício moderado e a sessão controle, mas entre os dois, as sessões de exercício intervalado, sem diferença, aqui na frequência cardíaca e aqui na velocidade média das sessões. Além disso, nas respostas hemodinâmicas, só houve alteração na pressão arterial sistólica, onde ela aumentou imediatamente após a sessão de exercícios, nas 3 sessões, sem diferença entre elas, e retornou aos valores pré-exercício na recuperação. Não houve alteração na PA diastólica, não houve alteração na rigidez arterial e não houve alteração na reatividade endotelial. E na glicemia, o que aconteceu? Aqui no gráfico A, a gente observa os valores absolutos da glicemia na seção da PSE, na seção da frequência cardíaca e na seção de exercício moderado, né? E aqui, por último, a seção controle. Então, na seção controle, pouco mudou a glicemia, quanto que na seção de moderada intensidade ela diminuiu e manteve-se diminuída. A mesma coisa aconteceu nas 2 sessões de exercício intervalado. Porém, quando a gente fez a diferença da glicemia inicial e final, seja imediatamente após, seja na recuperação, a redução durante as sessões de exercício intervalado foi maior, aqui no gráfico B, tanto imediatamente após o preto, quanto na recuperação 45, comparado com o exercício de moderada intensidade, né? E também não sendo diferença entre as 2 sessões de exercício intervalado. Aqui em valores absolutos, né? Miligramas por decilitro de queda na glicemia, aqui em valores percentuais, em torno de 25% de redução imediatamente após, mantendo-se em torno de 20%, 45 minutos após. Valores percentuais esse maior do que o encontrado aqui no exercício de moderada intensidade. E, por fim, né, a monitoração ambulatorial da pressão arterial, mostrando-se níveis mais baixos de pressão sistólica, tanto durante as 24 horas, quanto durante o período de vigília, na sessão de exercício intervalado prescrito e automonitorado pela PSE, aqui em preto, quando comparado aqui com a sessão controle. Não há diferença, né, entre o exercício intervalado de alta intensidade controlado pela PSE e o intervalado de alta intensidade controlada pela frequência cardíaca, bem como de moderada intensidade, sendo essa diferença somente relacionada à seção controle, e também, novamente, somente na pressão sistólica. Com isso, né, o que a gente tem de conclusões aí? Então, primeiro, né, de que a frequência cardíaca, velocidade, distância e gasto calórico durante o exercício, bem como a resposta da pressão arterial, foram similares entre o exercício intervalado prescrito e automonitorado pela PSE e o exercício intervalado prescrito e controlado pela frequência cardíaca resposta da frequência cardíaca ao teste ergométrico. E que o exercício intervalado, independente se prescrito e automonitorado pela PSE ou pela resposta da frequência cardíaca ao teste ergométrico, foi superior ao exercício de moderada intensidade para reduzir de maneira aguda a glicemia capilar, tá? Mostrando que, aliás, ainda é um exercício intervalado prescrito e automonitorado pela PSE, foi superior a ambos os exercícios para reduzir a pressão ambulatorial, porque somente ele reduziu comparado com a seção controle, mostrando que esta ferramenta ela é útil e efetiva para prescrever e automonitorar o exercício intervalado em indivíduos com diabetes do tipo 2. Né? Esse estudo, patrocinado pela FOPESP e pelo CNPq, aos quais eu agradeço aqui agora.
Então, eu agradeço a Bianca e ao professor Emanuel Gomes Ciolá, que a Bianca também é aluna de mestrado, pelas excelentes apresentações desses trabalhos científicos divulgados pelo nosso grupo. Então, para quem chegou agora, boa noite, eu sou Isabela, sou mestre em Ciências da Motricidade, e hoje estou aqui com o professor Emanuel Gomes Ciolá e o professor Cristian Alvarez. Novamente, obrigada pela presença de todos. Hoje o professor Cristian vai abordar um pouquinho sobre exercício, diabetes, obesidade e Covid conosco. Peço, então, a palestra será ministrada em inglês, nós vamos passar por inglês já, então peço para que vocês, ao final da palestra ou durante, podem mandar as perguntas no chat, pode ser em português ou pode ser em espanhol, pode ser em inglês, que depois a gente já traduz para o professor, então. Então, iniciando, agradeço a presença de todos, principalmente do nosso coordenador aqui, o professor Emanuel Ciolá, e também o professor Cristian Alvarez. Eu vou apresentar em português, primeiramente, o professor Cristian Alvarez, e depois a gente já passa para o inglês. Então, o professor Cristian Alvarez, ele obteve seu mestrado em treinamento esportivo em 2012 pela Universidade de Mayer, Chile. Em sequência, em 2018, ele tornou-se doutor em Ciências da Saúde pela Universidade Pública de Navarra, na Espanha, e atualmente ele é professor associado da Universidade de Los Lagos, Chile. É também coordenador do Laboratório de Performance Humana e coordenador do Grupo de Pesquisa Qualidade de Vida e Bem-Estar. Seu principal foco de pesquisa é explorar como a atividade física e o exercício físico podem melhorar doenças cardiometabólicas de alta prevalência no sistema público, como, por exemplo, a diabetes tipo 2. Ele também tem um interesse especial em fazer isso na América do Sul para promover, prevenir e usar o exercício como terapia para a saúde da população. So I'm going to pass to English now. I would like to thank you, Professor Christian, for being here today. I'm not sure if he's having some connection troubles, but I'm going to present him. I would like to thank you, everyone who is here today with us. It's the first symposium of the Ledoc Laboratório. So Professor Christian earned his master's degree in sport training at the University of Mayer, Chile in 2012. Subsequently, in 2018, he completed his PhD in health science at the Universidade Pública de Navarra, Spain. Currently, Professor Christian is Associate Professor at the Universidade de Los Lagos, Department of Health with the Quality of Life and Wellness Research Group. and the Laboratory of Human Performance. His main research focus is exploring how physical activity and exercise training can improve cardiometabolic disease of high prevalence in public health, such as type 2 diabetes. He also has a special interest in doing this in South America in order to promote, preventing, and using exercise as therapy for population's health. So thank you for being here today, Professor. I would like to ask for our participants here today to do the questions during or after the lecture, so we can translate even if it's Portuguese or English or Spanish.
Perfect. Good afternoon or night to all our students, post-degree students and colleagues. So I will share my screen. A second, please. Could you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah. Excellent. Well, first of all, many thanks by the presentation. And, well, to start with, I'd like to talk a bit about exercise training, which is defined as a planned, structured, progressive, and guided movements and with clear physiological aims. For example, the more common type of exercise training are endurance training, which is basically defined as low to moderate continuous. This is a very interesting different characteristic, which is continuous exercise training modality, commonly known also as a moderate intensity continuous training nowadays, or also named as aerobic training. Okay, this is a strongly physiological effects at level of the cardiorespiratory system and circulatory system. The other exercise modality known is the resistance training, also known as strength exercise, that have a strongly physiological effect at level of skeletal muscle mass and bone tissues. Another regime or exercise modality can be defined by the high intensity interval training, which their main characteristic is that it is an intermittent exercise applied in short periods of high intensity work with frequent rest periods between intervals. And finally, maybe another one of the most known or regularly used exercise modality is the concurrent training, which is the combination of moderate intensity continuous training plus resistance training, or the combination of HIIT plus resistance training. In terms of diabetes, we can define type 2 diabetes as a state of fasting hyperglycemia up or greater than 126 millimeters per liters, or glycated hemoglobin HbA1c up or greater than 6.5%. And by contrast, type 1 diabetes is the requirement of external insulin hormone in patients. Obesity definition is usually defined as a body mass index superior than or equal more than 30 kilograms per meter square of height. In this point, I like to mention that, for example, a waist circumference superior than 80 centimeters denote a high cardiovascular risk for South American individuals. This is important because Latin American countries need to propose their own cutoff point for their cardiovascular risk. Okay, and this is more relevant when there are some countries in the world or some races, such as South Asian, for example, that they have their own cutoff point, for example, of a body mass index equal or greater than 23 kilograms per meter square, denote obesity for South Asian. We have a big challenge at level of research, at level of the of propose. This is my pet, eh? At level of propose new cutoff point for all countries. In the sense of COVID-19 pandemia, the definitions basically was that the SARS virus CoV-2 has been identified in the 2019 year as a COVID-19 pandemia, because this was declared by a global infection. I like to mention as our exercise training experience in diabetes that we have 15 years studying exercise training. We have 10 years reporting exercise effects on type 2 diabetes mellitus patients and hypertensive patients, summarized as cardiometabolic patient, no? And we have also 10 years reporting outcomes of interest for type 2 diabetes patient and commonly used at level of public health, such as capillary blood samples, fasting plasma glucose, fasting insulin, homeostasis model assessment of insulin resistance, oral glucose tolerance test, and HbA1c, which, as I mentioned, all these are outcomes that are frequently and commonly used at level of public health system worldwide and among all Latin American countries. In terms of exercise training and type 2 diabetes and COVID-19, it is very important to differentiate some points at first. For example, it isn't the same to apply high intensity interval training, for example, on type 2 diabetes patients who are children, adult, or older adult. Or, for example, it is very different to apply resistance training modalities on type 2 diabetes patients who are children, adult, or older adults. But most important is that when this cohort have or do not have obesity or other comorbidities, such as arterial hypertension, dyslipidemia, respiratory disease, or about these are physically active or inactive. Under this line, the profile of type 2 diabetes patient can be widely different. For example, I remember that a recently study from Cassidy and colleagues show us that the impact on glucose control and cardiometabolic health comparing healthy and type 2 diabetes patients can be very similar. For example, in this graph, they show that around the efforts in terms of the axis, the y-axis, red lines about the heart rates in both type 2 diabetes patient and healthy control are very similar in the peak of in interval of work, and the rest period are similar. This is associated, highly associated with the same subjective effort measured by the Borg scale. On the other hand, these authors also report that there's an important reuptake of CA2 plus into sarcoplasmatic reticulums, and this increased the muscle work capacity. Additionally, this, um, this effort from the muscle promote increases at mitochondrial biogenesis, which increases the oxidative capacity, and this is associated with other increases at the level of proteins, molecular proteins, such as GLUT4. On the other hand, at the level of the cardiovascular system, it is important to add that high-intensity interval training also decrease the myocardial damage, increase the preload, increase the systolic volume and the ejection fraction, and then improve the flow-mediated dilatations, promoting an increases in the oxygen to all tissues. The summary of the HIIT high-intensity interval training benefits can be that there are an increased mitochondrial density and capacity following HIIT, leading to increased fat oxidation. There's an increase in proteins for increasing fat and glucose transport into cells. There's a large elevation in catecholamines, which have been shown to drive lipolysis, especially in the abdominal tissue, where there are significantly more beta-adrenergic receptor compared with fat. There is an appetite suppression, and this can be there is an appetite suppression, as I told you, because the energy intake the day after the HIIT session was 300 kilocalories less than after the moderate intensity continuous training. And also, and finally, the more important summary HIIT effect is that there is a modulation of vessel structure, which promotes wide benefits from, to vessels. And in this work, we work together with Dr. Emmanuel Gomez-Lac. We report how high intensity interval training promotes relevant decreases in fasting glucose in type 2 diabetic patients from 140 to 120 milligrams per deciliters. And we report the same benefits to glycated hemoglobin in these patients after 16 weeks of HIIT. On the other hand, other authors such as Fleming Della, they report that the efforts done by healthy and type 2 diabetes patients was very similar in 8 weeks of intervals. And this can be seen in the graph A, in which the effort perception and in terms of heart rate was also similar between healthy and type 2 diabetes patients, around the 80 to 100% of the maximum heart rate. And the decreases in the glycogen store was also similar between healthy and type 2 diabetes patients. Additionally, the oxygen, the maximum oxygen uptake during the effort was very similar between healthy and type 2 diabetes patients. Another study in we report the heart rates in at least 10, or typically known as a protocol of HIIT of 10 intervals. We show how was the heart rate between type 2 diabetes patient, pre-diabetes patient, and normoglycemic subject. Among these three different profile of subject, we report that before the starting each interval, the heart rate was very similar along 10 interval of work. And immediately before each interval, we report similarly no significant difference among these three cohorts. Then, this is an important effect that promote that not only healthy, but also pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes patient can ensure exercise modalities such as high-intensity interval training. On the other hand, I like to show that we have corroborated this, in which when we report also that how many beats per minute were recovered between each interval of hits in normoglycemic, pre-type 2 diabetes and type 2 diabetes patient, in which we detected almost small differences. Maybe an interesting study about how is the intermittent effort at the level of hormone and fat decreases or body composition can be shown by Stephen Butcher, in which Butcher and colleague show us that comparing the intermittent exercise in 10 interval of work, as we can see in this in this figure, the adrenaline plasma is increased in each interval, which is denoted by the points in blacks. But the circles in white are shown how is the control continuous exercise, in which almost there is no more secretion from gland adrenals to plasma of adrenaline. Then I like to show this example as how we can take a couple of drops of lemon, for example, which is not the same than to drink a complete or full cup of lemonade. Then, in this case, the continuous exercise can be represented by the poorly secretion of catecholamines such as adrenaline into plasma, and high-intensity interval training, in which there are repeated rest period gland, particularly the adrenal glands, like to secrete more adrenaline. In this line, we can see that the same author report that at the level of subcutaneous, figure A, there's more fat decreases than the steady state exercise or the control, and there are more abdominal fat decreases in HIIT exercise than the steady state group. Another interesting or widely known study is from the Martin Gibala group and Jonathan Little group, in which they monitored the 24-hour of glucose, in which high intensity, immediately the 24 hours before, after the last and the unique HIIT session, there was a significant decreases in the mean or average of 24 hours of glucose. And well, they also reported molecular outcomes such as the increases in the GLUT4 protein. On the other hand, other authors of the same Gibala group they have widely reported that the effort in this exercise modality is usually between the 80 to 100% of the maximal heart rate, with a subjective Borg modifier scale between 7 to 10 points. I like to mention the exosomes as mediator of the systemic adaptation to endurance training, which is a very interesting line of molecular research from the Adil Safar and Tarnopolsky author. They have shown recently that there are some molecules named exosomes that are released from the skeletal muscle after an effort, such as HIIT or endurance training, that are very soon delivered to the circulation, and using the circulation as transport, they have communication with the kidney, with the liver, and with very other organs, including the lungs. And we have science and scientific and researchers about exercise science have a lot of challenge for increasing the research in this line in time of COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 times. On the other hand, I can mention that we are seeing only the decline of the iceberg in terms of the physiological COVID-19 consequences are including respiratory, skeletal muscle mass, neurological, immunological, and psychological consequences. But we have to do a lot of work, and there are other, at the moment, not known consequences at the level of society, economy, physical and mental health, and government strategy, including research, exercise science, research in nutrition and immunological effects, medicine, vaccination, pharmacological, etc. So I can say that we have a lot of work to do. In terms of physiological COVID-19 consequences, I can say that there are small but maybe big challenge in terms of rehabilitation. For example, many patients have to need to be teach how to breathe. Patient post COVID-19 need to be teach to speak. They need to improve neurological independence. They need to improve full functional independence, and this is due to the most important point post COVID-19 is to recover the autonomy and functional independence of the daily life. Exactly. I mean, we are. Then, some clinical profiles of adults post-COVID-19 is that they show loss of balance, both young and older adults. They lose, they show a loss also of strength, young and adult. They lose weight, and that includes, of course, muscle mass, lean mass, and fat mass. There are some examples, for example, of that have lost more than there are patients, as I mentioned, that have lost more than their 50% of their total body weight. between 3 to 6 months of hospitalization. They show also basal tachycardia. They show a lower saturometry and higher heart rate at rest. They have an increasing heart rate per minute, and need to compensate the need for oxygen uptake from tissues. And sorry, the internet is a bit slow. Another characteristic of the clinical profile of adults post-COVID-19 is that they show an immune response from lungs to promote inflammation. There's an alveolar system function in very, very low levels. They show accelerated dyspnea. Breath is fast and short. However, it is required breaths slow and long. And for example, of getting up from lying down to sitting on the stretcher is very, very difficult. Additionally, this can be added to other psychological damage, and they get scared fast. Catecholamine are increased rapidly post-COVID-19, other consequences that I can mention. Then, summarizing the clinical profile of COVID-19 patient is that they show low weight, low skeletal muscle mass, particularly. They show low lean mass. Heart rate is increased at rest. They show more breaths per minute, and they show a lower cardiorespiratory fitness. They show low a loss of balance. They show also a lower autonomy and functional capacity, plus psychological and mental damage. And it is if we pay attention to this summary of COVID-19 consequences, we are talking about almost to a typical or to a known older adult without functionality and autonomy, and with a complete dependence of other people. How to get the best glucose control with exercise training in type 2 diabetes patients who acquire COVID-19? Well, we have a lot of challenge in this line. First, we need to apply a complete and integral evaluation or preliminary measurement or screening physically, psychologically, and overall health. This is very, very important. Another thing is that exercise training need to be applied in a progressive modality. We have to prioritize the autonomy and functionality over the glucose control. And maybe some exercise tips that I can give you. We can include that muscle mass and strength recovery is important. Resistance training is recommended to include strength evaluation based more on technological, for example, dynamometry, or by indirect estimation of 1 RM, one maximum repetition, but by estimation. Resistant training could be applied as isolated muscle groups, applied in very short time, in very short period or a few seconds, applied preferentially by 5 to 10 seconds of voluntary contraction more than an X percentage of 1 RM, one maximum repetition. Try it with very short exercise session. I mean less than 10 minutes per session, to include at least 1 or 2 very short exercise sessions, for example, per day. For example, 1 muscle groups in the morning and another muscle group in the afternoon. And it is very important also, I recommend to test the patient post-effort perception. And after the recovery, the next day of the exercise, post 24 hours, and post I told you 24 hours in order in order for testing the inflammatory response. Additionally, muscle mass at the level of muscle mass, I recommend to include resistance training in one joint, but increase progressively week by week to other joints and with movement with more functional demands. That is to adjust at their own physiological progression the complexity of exercise, to monitor the psychological and mental state regularly. On the other hand, at level of cardiorespiratory recovery, interval exercise is recommended. Explore intensity according with the patient possibilities. Pay attention with this. Definitely, as far as my experience can say, do not apply the common high intensity interval training as HIIT protocols, which like to work from 80 to 20% of the cardiorespiratory system. That include heart rate of VO2 max, to include extremely very short intervals. One thing is apply HIIT, and another things is to apply interval exercise, which is very different. Then extremely very short interval from 2 seconds in forward cycling, for example, to consider one leg or one arm, to include long and complete time of rest periods, controlling by saturometry and heart rate. Then a progressive interval training should be implemented, remembering the importance of the 5 to 7 familiarization sessions with the exercise machine. Also, it is important to test the post-effort perception of each patient. On the other hand, remember that it is not a guide or an tips as a guide. A second, please. Do not consider this tip as an experience and around the information that I have collected from my own circles. These tips are a summary of my experience, as I told you, from my own psycho professional and clinician who are working with COVID-19 patients and who are working with this profile of patient. Do not take preliminary bias about which one exercise type, load, in terms of intensity, volume, frequency, density can be applied. It is recommended that this action can be taken from, as I mentioned, a preliminary integral measurement and screening of each patient. And how is the patient adaptation and recovery? In summary, decreasing fasting glucose looking for improve the glucose control can be the last aim to start an exercise training program in type 2 diabetes patient post COVID-19 infection. And finally, I'd like to say thanks to my colleague, Dr. Eric Diaz from the Universidad de la Frontera, and to Master of Science, Jonathan Cano Montoya from the Clínica Alemana de Valdivia. Many thanks by their tips and their support in the information. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Christian, for your great presentation. We have some questions here. Just let me check. So the first one is, thank you for your presentation, Professor Christian. Obesity can be also considered as a pandemic. Is there studies investigating heat in children with obesity?
Oh, yep. Can I answer the question now, Isabel? Can answer the question? Okay. Well, I agree with the question, and I completely agree that obesity is considered maybe the first pandemic. I'm plenty sure that Latin American nations, particularly, such as Brazil, Chile, and others of Latin America, they have not forgotten the obesity pandemic. Maybe the concentration of the health system now is this pandemic originated from viruses such as the SARS-CoV-2, which is promoting death and more death. But it is an interesting comparison when we put the data of obesity and all their deaths that have been promoting from years in comparison with all the abrupt deaths that are promoting from the pandemic COVID-19. Then I completely agree with the question, which in terms of obesity is a pandemic. But before that, physically inactive and the sedentary state, also we can affirm or we can say that are also a pandemic, no? Sedentary state and the physically inactivity.
And what about the effect of heat in obese children? Is it effect?
Okay, thanks, Emmanuel. In terms of the application of high-intensity interval training in children, I have a very, very beautiful experience. We have published at least 3 or 4 works in school children, particularly in Chile, in which we applied 6 weeks, only 6 weeks of heat. And we appreciate and we report between 2, 3, 4, 5, and inclusive more than 5 kilograms of loose and significant fat decreases, significant fat decreases, with very sharply fat decreases in children. Children like to work interesting as an intermittent manner. They like to run and rest, run and rest. Then high-intensity interval training modalities applied in very, very short intervals, such as 5 seconds cycling, or no more than 10 or 20 seconds, which is too much for children, is very interesting. They like to increase rapidly their energy, their energy spent, and that contribute so much for increases the fat oxidation. And there are other factors that are important in children. They like to increase their height. In 1 month, in 4 weeks, children of 11 or 10 or 12 years old, they like to increase height 1 centimeter or 2 centimeter or more. Then, together with the heat or exercise training heat effect, we have another additional factors that influence how children decrease weight and leave the overweight. We are talking about the maturation, biological maturation. They increase height and they increase rapidly their energy expenditure.
Thank you, Professor Christian. Actually, I have a question now. So, thinking on the other hand, not just in children, but thinking in elder population. So, what do you know now about the cardiometabolic disease and COVID in elderly? I mean, do you have your laboratory is working in some project that you are working on this population. What can you tell us about this, please?
Well, maybe we have in confirmation some projects about older adults in Chile, and from my own experience, I've been hit, for example, in population with more adult years, adult cohorts, such as older adults. In this COVID-19 times, as type 2 diabetes patient like to lose a lot of weight after the COVID-19 infection, I recommend that we need to be very, very careful with the interval training application in older adults in terms that high intensity interval training like to promote fat decreases. And then malnutrition older adults or older adults who are underweight can be potential patient with detrimental effect from heats if heats like to promote and exacerbate more weight decreases in this older adult. Then I recommend, or I prefer to recommend for older adults post COVID-19 infection the application of another exercise strategy such as resistance training. Why resistance training? Because naturally older adults need to improve their balance, need to improve their functional capacity, but more older adults after COVID-19 infection need to improve then their immunological system. And I am really not sure about the exactly promotion of heat in older adult. I prefer to leave this particularly to each patient and to analyze the application or one or another exercise modality independent in according to the characteristic of how was the detrimental or damage in that older adult particularly, okay? But I recommend to be careful with how was the loss of total body mass after the COVID-19 infection, which is important in terms of to apply a strategy that promotes fat decreases or to apply another strategy that promotes muscle mass increases and recovery.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. So we have another question here from Vanessa. She congrats you for the presentation, and also she wants to know, there are numerous reports of post-COVID-19 patients who developed diabetes type 2. What the impact do you believe this can have in long term?
Well, I think that I show a slide that we see an iceberg. Okay, we see an iceberg in which we are in this time in the middle of the maybe COVID-19 pandemic. We are at the moment suffering of a lot of consequences, but we at the moment we have not seen all the other consequences that the same the same science and researchers need to continue reporting before the pandemic cessation. I mean that exercise science, in combination, this opportunity with more strength with the nutrition, and because the nutrition has a direct role in the immunological system in the fight with the COVID-19 pandemic. Why I say this? Because I think that more than the glucose control, which is in which the exercise training alone, together with the appropriate nutrition, we will working together with a more strength immunological system can be important, but more important is to have a patient mentally focused on exercise, without scare to exercise. More important is to have a patient that participate in a progressive exercise training modality, that are factors more important to ensure in the future weeks or in the future sessions to progressive or to get a better glucose control. I mean, most important is to have a patient in security participating of exercise training more than to look for immediately for glucose control.
Okay, Christian, thanks. I have a personal question, and I would like to know your opinion. The pandemic show us that obesity, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, all together have a poor prognosis if I get COVID-19. Do you think if you had our homework to be physical activity, to have a good nutrition, and to make our homework by preventing these chronic conditions, do you think the course of the pandemic would be different?
The last part of the question, could you repeat me, please, dear Manuel? Please.
Do you think if you
part only
have did our homework to be physical active, to have good nutrition, to make all the preventions to have a good health? And do you think the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic would be different? We have a lower impact, a large impact in the society?
Well, I like to remember, Emmanuel, the last World Health Organization recommendation for physical activity that you mentioned in the previous presentation that we see, in terms of that maybe each movement every day counts, no? But in this line, we have to separate the clinical profile of population. Before pandemic or by COVID-19, we had healthy people, and on the other hand, we had also people who were suffering of cardiometabolic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, hypertension, with obesity, that definitely are showing more statistic deaths than people who is healthy. I think that if the question is, it is the same to promote that people can exercise at home than to do not do nothing. Well, definitely I prefer to promote at least movement at home. But the consequences of the quarantine, which is term in English, I forget the name. In Spanish, we like to say confinamiento. The sedentary state promoted, or the exacerbated sedentary state and physical activity promoted by the COVID-19 have unknown consequences. I like to repeat the example of the iceberg. We are only seeing the climb of the iceberg, but we have a lot of other known detrimental effects to see. And one of these are the psychological effects of all the family. In addition to all those body composition and physical health that we are known. Then I consider that the health system, the public health system, need to rechange the direction to focus in the post COVID-19 times. They need to, this system need to increase the investment in promote not only pharmacological strategy, but more than increase their spend, increase funding for physical activity promotion, for exercise training promotion. But the promotion need to be not late, because we need to apply the health system in a new direction, working more with healthy people, more than those patients that have a cardiometabolic diagnosis, who also this public health system need to apply exercise training as a medicine, as a natural medicine. A big amount of cardiometabolic diseases can be prevented if we can prescribe exercise training as medicine, inclusive together with pharmacological strategies, as we have shown in a couple of studies, no, dear Dr. Emmanuel, in which we show that type 2 diabetes patients decrease fat, improve body composition, they improve the glucose control, they change from a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes to pre-diabetes, and then from pre-diabetes, this patient like to change to normoglycemic. And then what is the problem, and why not our public health system are now investment or increasing the investment in non-pharmacological strategies or lifestyle strategies such as physical activity or exercise training, nutrition for health promotion in people. So we have a lot of challenge, but government, Latin American government particularly, have a lot of challenge, and I think that we need to take this as an opportunity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Professor. Thank you for your great answer. And unfortunately, we are almost at 9, so we have to finish our live today. But again, I would like to thank you, Professor Cristian, for being here today and accepting our invitation. It's really nice to having you here today, Professor. And now I'm going to switch for Portuguese. So, obrigada a todos que estiveram aqui presentes hoje. Obrigada, professor Cristian. Graças. E esperamos vê-los amanhã, então, no nosso terceiro dia de Simpósio Ledoc de Exercício Físico e Doenças Crônicas. Obrigada a todos pela presença e encerramos aqui, então, o nosso segundo dia.
Okay, see you. Obrigado. Tipo, com o Dr. Lac, Group Research, Laboratório de Pesquisa, and good.
Thank you, Chris.
Okie dokies, dear friend. How was that?
It was good. Sometimes have a cut, but it was okay. Very nice presentation.
Perfect. I prefer to stop when the signal was